"Can we get started?" Abigail said, looking at the younger woman sitting on the expensive chair on the other side of the desk. Even though she would never admit to it, Abby liked these occasions. It wasn't so much the article that would be written about her. There had been more than 24 throughout her life, but the fact that this person across from her had to feel incredibly small right now. She could see her nodding while fidgeting around with her notebook and smartphone. It would have been even better if it had been a man, Abby thought, and she couldn't help but smile to herself anyway. People still feared her, and she reveled in their discomfort. She let her hands sink down to the desk and openly grinned at the young woman now slowly looking up from her phone. "Don't worry, honey. I will not bite," she joked, and watched the woman now quickly putting down the booklet and device. The young journalist looked up and met her eyes for the first time, now staring at her almost defiantly. That Abigail didn't like at all. Something in those eyes seemed strange. This woeful gaze, this rebelliousness. She could feel her insides churning as she met the stare and held it. Apparently, this new generation of reporters lacked common courtesy and respect. "Miss Abigail Jones, your 80th birthday is coming up, which is a great opportunity for our readers to learn more about the, in all likelihood, greatest living person in our city." Abby's grin was still frozen on her lips as she watched the young woman spewing out that bullshit. She could see it clearly. Not a single word of what she had just said was meant in earnest. The girl didn't respect her, didn't care for her or the opportunity to interview her. There was hardly anything she'd want more than to simply leave. What she had thought of as respect beforehand had been nothing more than a bored little girl slogging her way through the preparation, just putting in enough effort to not get kicked out. She was incensed. "I would not call myself the greatest person living in our city right now, darling, but thank you for the compliment," she finally replied, fake sweetness dripping from her voice. The girl, to her credit, didn't jump at the bait. "You've been Woman of the Year countless times. You've single-handedly broken through a glass ceiling and became the first female millionaire all on your own, while funding and advancing a multitude of social and humanitarian causes. I think calling you the greatest person of and in the city is absolutely in order, Miss Jones." Dirty little suck-up, Abigail thought. "That's a very nice compliment. Thank you," she said out loud. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a few questions our readers are burning to get answered." Abby's grin felt frozen on her lips. The girl sitting across from her treated her like some living curiosity. She could see it, feel it, even hear it in every single syllable coming out of that young and pretty mouth. Already knowing the questions that would be coming soured her mood further. It was always the same after all. What was her secret? She would answer her drive, her innate desire to succeed, to not let the world keep her down, while internally rolling her eyes. "We dug up some things from your past, Miss Jones. And I'm sure our readers would want to know what you think about the names people gave you before you started financing all those social causes. Like the West Side Witch. Abigail's fake smile fell and was replaced with something more akin to a real grin. The girl had done her homework. There weren't that many people alive who still knew her by that name. She had relished it. Remembering those days made her relive some of those memories. The smell of wet dirt, of dark and cold nights, the sound of hoofs running through the street. That is one hell of a name, darling. Yes, people used to call me that, and many, many things more. It comes with the territory, don't you think? The business world is a merciless one, and being a woman definitely didn't help me there, either. Men are such cruel and callous creatures, you see. The reporter kept on smiling softly, though her eyes never left hers. So, you don't want to talk about the deaths surrounding almost all of your companies? Abigail smacked her lips. That was a threat. The little girl really wanted to have a go at her. Amazing. She couldn't help but grin widely. So, you're not just here for a fluff piece, huh? For the first time, she could see the other woman stopping her fake smile as well. Our readers do have the right to know the real story. Wouldn't you agree? Abigail softly shook her head. Do you really think some small newspaper is the right place for the real story? No offense to you, but you have hardly any readers, and no one of importance in your organization. I did some digging as well, of course. And you, Miss Brown, haven't been working there for more than a year. I'm afraid you might be out of your depth, child. That one had to sting, Abby thought, and delighted as she watched the young woman narrowing her eyes. I didn't think you'd be prone to underestimating your opponents, Miss Jones. The reply came shortly, followed by another insult. I would have thought you, of all people, should very well know what someone in your very own position can be capable of. Abigail shot up from her seat and watched the girl freeze for a second. You really think you're in the same position I was in? The anger bubbling up in her was strange. It, as well, was something she hadn't felt in years, almost decades. This little upstart there honestly thought she knew everything, and that fact made her blood boil. I had to fight every day, all day long, to even scrape together enough not to starve, child. You got given your position by a friend of your dad. We are not the same. The girl was now staring at her with disdain in her eyes. Maybe she was fishing for something, Abigail thought. She might want her to break off the interview midway or provoke her until she spilled some secrets. The second one might be fun, Abby thought, and could feel her grin returning. So, are you going to continue coming at me like that in the hope I say something dumb you can spin into your own story? She asked and watched closely. Her opponent's eyes narrowed. What a bad poker face. You know, if you want to make something up about me, You don't need to insult me first, right? Getting your interview partner riled up might work with someone lesser. But don't play games with me, honey. I've worked with people like you for decades. You guys always think you'll make it big if only you just get a break. But I can guarantee you, all I would need to do is pick up that phone and you'll never work in your industry again. So, how about it? You want to hear the real story behind my success? Off the record, of course, but I'll let you put together a nice little piece if you promise me editorial rights. Abigail watched the young woman and could almost read her thoughts. She had come here to provoke her, to get something new and fresh out of her, and right now she could see almost everything she wanted put in front of her on a silver platter. But there were strings attached, as everywhere in life. Only Abigail didn't know if this girl could even see the strings. She looked up at her now, no longer with disdain in her eyes, but greed. Stupid girl, Abby wanted to say, but kept her mouth shut. Maybe, if she survived, she might actually learn and grow from this experience. She motioned at the woman to give her the phone and could see her slide it across the table in a second. Again, Abigail wanted to shake her head in disbelief. The woman had just given up her only line of calling for help without hesitation. Still, she picked up the phone and turned it off. What she was about to say wasn't something she wanted flying around the internet somewhere. As soon as the device was powered off, she rounded the big, ornate desk of her study until she was close enough to the woman to simply whisper. Big eyes stared up at her expectantly. I killed a lot of people in my time, child. Dozens, maybe even 100. She started and could see a smile forming on the young woman's lips. But that is not something you can prove anyway. It all started when I was just a young girl, like you. You know, the city back then was a completely different place. I grew up in the alleys around town, brought to an orphanage as a baby, and I had to fight to survive from almost day one. This wasn't one of the good orphanages, by the way. I made sure to buy the lot a few decades ago and set that disgusting place on fire before tearing it down, brick by brick. There are no more records of it anywhere, so you couldn't check that either. Right now, all you can see of it are 3 rose bushes. And as long as I live, nothing else will be built there. She could see the journalist already looking up at her impatiently. This wasn't the part of the story she was interested in after all, Abigail reasoned to herself, and didn't let her mood sour. When I was 6 years old, the world showed me its true face for the first time. Back then, we were around 24 children in a room not even half as big as the study you're sitting in right now. The girl looked around and then furrowed her brow. Yeah, we slept huddled up, which was fine in winter, but during summer, you could hardly even breathe. The administration of the orphanage tried to keep the boys and girls separated, but it just wasn't possible. There were couples and assaults going on daily, but the worst thing was the wardens. 2 of them, to be exact. All the children knew about them, and even the new arrivals quickly learned to never be caught by them on their own. Most of the time, I was lucky. But some days, it's not a story that has to be told, don't you think? I learned quickly to either move with the groups or to keep someone smaller and weaker than me close by. We did what we had to do to survive, you understand. I'm not proud of how I did it, but I got very good at escaping those pieces of shit by sacrificing the others. Believe it or not, but I still remember some of their faces. Quite a few never made it out of the orphanage at all. They either ran away and died out in the streets, or took their fate into their own hands, somewhere beneath the rafters of the attic. When I turned 15, it got really, really bad. One new arrival, Oliver, was the cause. I don't know how or who brought him into the orphanage, or why, but he was in all probability the worst human being I have ever seen. And yes, I'm including the assholes in City Hall here as well. He liked to torture animals and other children. The smaller, the better. Some nights I got startled awake by a scream coming from somewhere in the orphanage. And more often than not, Oliver was involved, pretending to just guide the child back to its room, while blood was still dripping onto their gowns. A few of us tried to stop him. We cornered him and beat him up, but all it did was make matters worse. One of the youngest children lost an eye as soon as Oliver left the infirmary, and from then on, he started hunting everyone who was involved in the beating. He broke in the teeth of my friend with a crowbar he had found somewhere, and hit another one so hard on the back of the head that the child started having seizures from then on. No one ever came near him again, until one night, as I was coming back from the toilet, I could see a shadow waiting by the slightly open door of the dorm I had been sleeping in. Have you ever felt real fear? The young woman was staring up at her, but nodded slightly. I don't think you have, honey. I'm sure you were scared once, maybe even terrified. Probably as a child or something. But true, real fear, it's just different. You can suddenly feel your heart beating faster and faster. You can see details you'd never notice otherwise. And while your instincts scream at you to run, your body moves as if it was stuck in molasses. I knew he was there, and he knew exactly where I was. He had his crowbar in his hand and knelt by the door, ready to strike me down the instant I would have passed by him. My body froze, but only for a moment. Maybe those years of torture numbed me to it. I know I did feel scared before as well, but never to the same extent. Thinking you will die and knowing that you will truly are different. As soon as I saw the shadow move, I did as well. I turned on my heel and ran through the orphanage. Maybe I could have screamed, but I remember thinking that he would catch up to me if I did. So I kept my mouth shut and concentrated on breathing. Our footsteps still echo through my mind, even now. The dark, empty halls with their rickety boards, me running in front while Oliver followed oh so close behind. I jumped out through a window on the first floor, and he came after me, only a moment later. Do you think he knew what he was doing? Did he intend to kill me? Or was he just rage-filled and completely out of his mind? The woman simply shook her head and looked at her with a furrowed brow, as if to tell her to get to the point already. Abigail smiled grimly as she thought back to that night. He chased me across the lawn of that place, where dark trees stood and deep shadows reigned. Back then, there was a forest behind the orphanage, where there's a parking lot and mall today. We always played there, and I thought I knew the place well enough to get Oliver off my trail once we got lost in the darkness. It probably was the best idea of my life, looking back now, even though I really regretted it back then, rather quickly. As soon as I slipped into the darker shadows, something hard and sharp hit me right below the shoulder. He had thrown his crowbar after me and hadn't missed. I still remember the pain and fear as I stumbled, fell, then rolled over the rough ground and roots. Oliver was above me before I could get up. I could smell him, his sweat and sour breath as he spat me in the face. Back then, I was just like you, all bravado and nothing to back it up. I kicked at him, spat at him, and got punched in the face for all my effort. Thank God he had lost sight of his crowbar as well. I'm sure he would have split my head open with it if he hadn't. Abigail looked down at the woman who had finally stopped staring back up at her with this furrowed brow and was now waiting more passively. He punched me again and again, 3 times. I remember my lips splitting open and my nose breaking at the 3rd or 4th hit. My screams stopped, as did my resistance. Something inside of me forced me to resign myself, just like with the wardens, though this time I probably would have died if I hadn't come to my senses soon after. Did he... You know... The young woman asked meekly, and Abigail gave her a big, evil grin. No, he wasn't a sexual predator, just a sadist and a psychopath. As soon as I stopped struggling, his hands found my throat, and he began choking me with the full force of his fingers. That's something you definitely haven't experienced either. Someone intent on killing you. It took me a few seconds after I realized that I couldn't breathe anymore and already felt dizzy before I finally regained enough of my senses to kick him and scratch his face. My fingernails found his eye, and I still remember that scream very, very well. He cried and cursed, and in that moment, I finally managed to kick him where it hurts and rolled out from under him. For a split second, I could see Oliver's face, twisted in pain and rage as I kicked him against his chest again, turned and tried to run away. My legs didn't quite listen to me. I stumbled more than I really raced through the small patch of forest, but what drove me on is that I could still hear him back there. At first, for a couple of seconds, he was crying. Then, it turned to this angry huffing he always did when he had cornered a new victim. I slid past a couple of trees, sure he wouldn't be able to find me if only I stayed still. Yet soon after, heard him coming right in my direction. Do you think he could feel my presence? I know that sounds completely dumb, but there's so much more out in this world than we can see. And I'm sure there are people who can feel others. That had to be it, right? It was so dark back then, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. But Oliver still followed me without a problem. I remember trying to get air into my lungs, my throat hurting and my legs and arms shaking like leaves on a tree. In some way, I think I felt far more alive at that moment than at any point before, or even since. This rush of adrenaline. Many people are looking exactly for something like that. The clarity it brings. But I digress. Abigail stopped herself as she slowly pushed herself off the edge of the desk and walked past the still sitting woman, who now had to turn her whole body to follow her with her eyes. She took her time as she slowly walked through the room that was far too ornate, far too expensive for her liking under normal circumstances. It was just something visitors expected of her. She still reasoned with herself. She wouldn't have gotten where she was now in life if not for some theatrics. As Abigail slowly walked toward the right-hand side of the room with the polished wooden bookshelves, she started humming a soft tune. It was a song she had heard in the orphanage. The few truly good workers and wardens there had all hummed it to the newborns that had been dropped off, and it had stuck with her. She was smiling now, softly, so different from the way she normally behaved. It was strangely liberating, talking about that stuff with someone else. And even though Abigail knew it would only be for a short while, she could feel the immense pressure she was under lifting off her shoulders. Her feet carried her through the room and toward the space of the bookshelves where different oddities were placed. An ornate dagger, something that looked like a scroll, and the one thing people normally always thought of as tacky. She smiled again as she turned and rested her back against the wood close to her most prized possession, while looking at the woman once more. Her eyes were still firmly on her, not on the object next to her shoulder. Good, Abigail thought. He almost caught up to me again back then. I was losing my mind trying to get away from him, but it was no use. He was coming after me and stayed on my trail no matter how many times I changed direction or where I hid. In my blind panic, I missed a step, fell, and slid down a soft, wet dirt slope. There were hardly any trees around this part, so I could finally see. Yet I missed it nonetheless. The noise that came out of my mouth must have traveled far and wide in that instant. But no one answered my call. Not even birds or other small creatures. The world was indifferent to my suffering, you see. It's the same today as it was back then. No one cares if you're hurt or scared or about to die. You will do so alone and abandoned in the end. Abigail could see the woman's expression changing as well. She was looking at her with a strange mix of impatience and eagerness. What you need is not a friend, or lover, or even partner. A thing that takes you furthest in life, as if you have an ally. She let her hand touch the hard but smooth object next to her shoulder, and Abigail could see the young woman's eyes finally grow wide. I found him back then. This skull, it was his. Somehow it had gotten lost in that small forest, or maybe the former owner had placed it there, knowing I would come by. The moment I touched it, I could feel it. This presence. Oliver wasn't very far behind me. He was already sliding down the slope. Only now, he had a thick branch in his hand and was ready to clobber me to death. This time, as I screamed, someone answered me. The sound of hooves racing over the forest floor. I remember grabbing hold of the skull again, shielding it from view, as even Oliver stopped and looked over in the direction of the noise. A giant, dark figure broke through the brush as four legs braced against the slopes, and this behemoth slid down toward me. For a single moment, I wasn't sure if I had just signed my own death warrant, to be perfectly honest. The thing was as dark as the night, covered in what looked like black armor, and sitting upon the most ominous horse I have ever seen. In its hand, it held something that looked like a sword, and then it stopped right between me and Oliver. It was looking at me, even though it had no eyes, grinning without a mouth. The headless rider had found me, towering so high above me, I could feel nothing but fear and dread. Yet the skull I kept beneath my shirt started vibrating softly, as if he wanted to speak. Either of them could end my existence. I knew back then. The psychopath or the monster? But something inside me told me not to give up hope. That I had brought forth the monster, and since it had followed my call, it would obey my command. I raised one hand and pointed at Oliver. Kill him! My scream was far too loud. I'm not sure if anyone else heard me. But the horseman definitely did. He turned his horse toward him, and this time I could see true terror in Oliver's eyes. The branch slid out from between his fingers, and he tried to climb back up the slope, but the black-clad behemoth was above him long before he could. I remember his last whimper, and the thud as the horse caught him beneath its hooves. A cruel display, for sure, and one I still see in my dreams. Yet those are not nightmares, child. The nightmare was everything before, being powerless, used and abused. What I learned that night made me what I am today. It brought me to the top, so to speak. Oliver was buried in a shallow grave. I now know that I could have let the horseman take his body away, but back then I still did a lot of the dirty work myself. Next, I cleaned up the orphanage. There's 2 wardens. Yeah, they both had accidents the following nights. The place I had grown up in, this place I had feared, I turned it into my home. Abigail was still smiling while her fingers slowly danced over the forehead of the skull. The woman was looking at her in abject horror. She probably thought her mad, but it didn't matter. Most of the people she had met in her life had thought so at one point or another. Some of them had then seen what truly was behind her madness. But none of them had survived the visit of the horseman. I used him regularly. First, to get myself some room in the orphanage, then to protect myself and my wares as I ventured out into the world. My competition always disappeared. That's something you couldn't have dug up about me, since I made damn sure all the records got destroyed soon after as well. The higher I got, the less I had to rely on him. After a certain point, threatening people with ruin becomes far more effective than killing them. But I still continued studying him. The horseman. There are so many things you can use one for. The smile on her lips seemed to chill the air, and Abigail watched in delight as the young woman shot up from her chair, clutching her handbag and picking up her phone. She didn't dare show her back anymore. How about we play a little game, Miss Brown? If you manage to get back home, safe and sound, I'll let you write whatever article you want. You can call me a witch again. Tell the world that I killed people. You can call me evil incarnate, a murderous sorceress. Believe me, I've been called all of those names many times over and worse. All you have to do is outrun my horseman. Deal? Abigail laughed as she saw the woman finally turn and run. No, she didn't believe her, Abby thought while shaking her head. Young Miss Brown probably thought she was completely mad and dangerous. That she would attack her from behind with one of those ornate souvenir daggers she had lying around. A chuckle escaped her as she saw the door to her study fall shut. She waited patiently until she could hear the entrance being pulled open in pure, heedless panic before she turned to the skull again. It still vibrated softly under her fingertips as coldness and warmth seemed to ebb and flow through the old bone. Get the woman, but make it look like an accident. If she manages to make it to her home, you can leave her be, she whispered, and felt the same rush she had felt back in the forest next to the orphanage on that first night. He would do as she commanded, she knew. Miss Brown didn't really have a chance. No one had escaped him yet. Abigail left the skull behind and quickly walked to the window looking out into the city at night. The long road leading away from her property snaked its way through parts of the forest she had visited back then. The most fitting place, Abigail thought with a smile. 2 headlights appeared beneath her as the car shot out of the driveway, past her 3 rose bushes, and toward the open gate. She could hear it, the hooves thundering over the soft dirt outside her estate. The sound still made her smile. Abigail let out a chuckle as she saw the shadow racing through the thickets between the trees, heading for the road. No chance at all, she said with a grin, turned away from the window, and laughed out loud as she made her way out of the study.